Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Skelegun again. Today I'm going to be doing my first non-movie review. It is for the Clive Barker novella, The Hellbound Heart, which, as I'm sure some of you are aware, is the basis for the horror movie franchise Hellraiser. Now, I got this book, The Hellbound Heart, at my local library for about a quarter. You should check out your local library. They often have book sales where you can go and buy old books. I got this in really good, nearly unused condition. I mean, I don't think they ever, there's no, stickers or anything, or barcodes, or those, things in the back. So I don't think they ever even put this out on a shelf. But, anyways, so that's my PSA of the day. Go to your local library. You can find all sorts of great books, and sometimes they even sell old DVDs and movies and CDs, that kind of stuff. So just check them out. Now, anyways, today I will be talking about The Hellbound Heart. This is, as I mentioned, the basis for the movie Hellraiser. Now, the movie Hellraiser came out in 1987. It was written and directed by Clive Barker, who also wrote the novella, I should say. It was based on Hellbound Heart, which came out 1 year prior. Clive Barker was, I believe he may have had some movies before that based on his works, and he really was not happy with the way they turned out, so he asked the studio to let him basically produce and write the screenplay and direct the movie version of The Hellbound Heart. I haven't ever read The Hellbound Heart before, so I'm going to read that and then give you my opinion on it. But before I go and read the book, I just want to talk a little bit about Hellraiser, the series, first. So last time I checked, there's about 9 or 10 movies in the series. I think there's even more coming out in the future. As I mentioned earlier, the first movie was written and directed by Clive Barker. I don't remember off the top of my head how extensive his involvement in the second movie was, but I do remember he did have some involvement in it. Then from there on, the series becomes increasingly divergent from his original intention. The third movie is decent. It does mark a dramatic change in the series. The fourth movie was an Alan Smithee production. Now, for those of you who don't know, Alan Smithee is the film version of Anonymous. It basically means that you directed a movie, but the movie was so bad you don't want to be associated with it. So rather than credit yourself, you just credit yourself as Alan Smithee, which, like I said, it's just basically saying I have nothing to do with this. Please don't attach my name to it. Just give me my paycheck. That's how much of a mess the fourth movie is. The fourth movie is just an incoherent, steaming pile of garbage. It basically cashed in on a fad that was happening in horror movies in the 90s, where they decided to do a sequel set in space. Dumb movie. After that, the series just kind of loses all cohesion, and they just become a series of unrelated films that basically the studio got the rights to and decided to pigeonhole or shove Pinhead and the Cenobites into. Now, I think it's a good time to talk about the Cenobites. The main villains in the Hellraiser series are these demons called the Cenobites. All started out originally as humans who sort of sunk into depravity, and through, hedonism and excess, discovered a gateway to another dimension called the Labyrinth. There they pursued all manners of decadence and excess and hedonism, and eventually end up becoming these sort of twisted and mutated-looking hunks of, scar tissue and bondage and all kinds of, self-mutilation. And this realm, the Labyrinth, it's cut off from reality, but the way you can get into it is it's mentioned that there's several possible entranceways. One of them is this mysterious puzzle box called Lamonchan's Configuration. It's this little gold and black puzzle box that when you solve it, if you manage to solve it, it opens a gateway to the Cenobites, and they come, and they can't leave without a soul, so guess what, buddy, you're coming with them, and from then on, it's all just meat hooks, and you're gonna get the meat hooks. They're gonna put some meat hooks in you. They're gonna use the word flesh a lot. They're gonna say it really creepy, and you're gonna get pulled apart by meat hooks. Did I mention meat hooks? There's a lot of meat hooks, and Cenobites talking about flesh. That's one of the big things about the series, is meat hooks and Cenobites talking about flesh. So that's enough about the Cenobites and the meat hooks and the talking about flesh. Let's move on. Okay, so that is kind of the overall theme of the series. The series really gets lost in the weeds later on. I mean, 5 is like the last watchable movie. After that, they're all just complete messes. But that's the general theme. The series is overall sort of about how these people who think they've reached the limit of experience, so then they dabble in things that they're not prepared for, and then they end up getting meat hooked. First movie in the series, which this book I'm going to be based on, is Hellraiser. That particular story is about a man named Frank Cotton, is sort of this decadent guy who is obsessed with, like, pleasure, and in his travels he comes across the box, and then he solves it. He ends up getting meat hooked into oblivion. A few years later, his brother moves into his old house where he got meat hooked, and the brother brings his wife and his daughter. The wife had an affair with Frank a few years prior, and basically, like, Larry, the husband, was this sort of boring milquetoast guy, but brother Frank, he's like, this like sort of sexy, dangerous type bad boy guy. Anyway, so it turns out that Frank somehow managed to escape from the Cenobites, and he is he's like this sort of just like destroyed, fleshless body up in the room he died in, and he uses Julia, the wife, to bring men to the house that she then murders, and he absorbs their like flesh, becoming slowly more whole until finally Christy, I forget her name, the daughter of Larry, catches on. First she thinks that Julia's cheating on her dad, seeing these like men come and going to the house at weird hours. She finds, she stumbles in on it. She is confronted by like this like skinless apparition of Frank, and she grabs the puzzle box as looking for something to defend herself, and in the process she accidentally summons the Cenobites, and the Cenobites then are like, okay, either we take your soul with us, or you help us bring back Frank, who escaped. And then it becomes like a thing where Frank, basically, like, they know that as soon as Christy comes back, she's going to tell Larry, so Julia and Frank kill Larry and steal his skin, and then, that leads to the climax where the Cenobites come and they kill Frank Larry hybrid again with the meat hooks, and then the Cenobites decide, oh hey, we're gonna take you with us too, Kirsty, but she escapes in the nick of time. And yeah, so that's the first movie in a nutshell. From what I understand, this book pretty accurately, the movie pretty accurately follows the book, because it's based, it's written and directed by the guy who wrote the book, so why wouldn't it be? The book is also really short. It's a novella. It's only, let's see here, 164 pages. So I'm gonna read this book, and then afterwards I'm gonna tell you like what kind of differences I noticed, and we'll go from there. Hey, I just read this book, and boy are my eyes tired. Ha ha ha. Anyways, okay, so I finished reading Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart. It is very accurate. The movie is very accurate to the book, I have to say. There are some differences that are worth talking about, though. Probably one of the most important things to talk about first is the opening scene. Now, in the movie, the opening is just, from what I remember, because it's been a little bit since I've last seen the movie. From what I remember, the movie opened with Frank in this sort of market street somewhere in Asia, purchasing the Lamarchand's box from it's like this guy who's like, "What is your pleasure?" he says, and then it cuts to Frank solving the box in this like dirty room. After he solves the box, though, things like some spooky stuff happens, and then he's just immediately meat hooked, and it like explodes into meat, and then like the camera cuts back, and there's just like meat all over the place. This scene is substantially different in the book. In the Hellbound Heart, Frank is in the room. It's worth noting that in the movie, the room is just this sort of dark, dank-looking, disgusting room, whereas in the book, it's mentioned that since Frank's been preparing to do this for a long time. He's had the room all cleaned up. He has an altar set aside for what he assumes are these pleasure gods that are going to come and, usher him into Shambhala, or whatever you want to call it. He said he even has a jar of urine set aside that he's been saving for a week, just in case these new pleasure gods want him to demonstrate his degeneracy in front of them. Also, in edgy Clive Barker fashion, he has a bowl of severed dove's heads laid out waiting, because, it's Clive Barker, you gotta have that edge, that egginess to it. So anyways, he solves the puzzle finally, and the wall gives way to this sort of howling vortex, and then the Cenobites appear before him, rather than just immediately meat-hooking him. So the Cenobites appear before him, and he's just kind of shocked at first, because what appears before him, he was expecting, these, beautiful, sexy goddess demons or whatever, but instead he gets a bunch of what look like weak, frail bundles of scar tissue and, wounds, and they smell awful, and they look just degenerate. And he's repulsed by them, and he's basically repulsed and afraid. He almost can't bring himself to speak, but it says he quickly overcomes his fear because of how weak these things look. He almost pities them because they're so defeated looking. So they immediately just sort of grant him enhanced senses, and he's able to perceive. He can feel every gust of wind. It feels like it's agonizing. Every sight is blinding. Every sound is deafening. He can hear himself. He can hear his own blood flowing. He can smell feces from a mile away. It's just awful. And that he collapses onto the floor, basically overcome by his senses. Then it cuts to, the family arriving in the house sometime later. And one difference that is kind of weird, I noticed, is that in the movie, the father's name is Larry, whereas in the book his name is Rory. I don't know if maybe I know there were some changes that were kind of forced on him by the executives. I don't know if maybe they made him change the name from Rory to Larry for some reason. That's kind of an odd change, but I don't know. Anyways, from then on, they pretty much follow each other really closely for a while at least. It's still the whole. The book does delve a little bit more into Frank and Julia's, I don't know what you'd call it, tryst they had shortly before Julia's marriage to Larry/Rory. One thing that is quite different about the book as opposed to the movie is that the book focuses mostly on Julia. Julia is sort of the main character, if you will, through most of the book, whereas in the movie, Christy is the main character. She's the heroine. The book does shift focus to Kirsty later on, but the early parts of the book mostly focus on Julia and sort of how she no longer respects Rory. She's experienced this deep connection with, or so she thinks, with his dear departed brother Frank. Also, the book does expand a little bit more on Frank as well. In the movie, he's just kind of mysterious, and they mention that he's, kind of like a scoundrel. They don't really delve too deeply into his background. In the book, you find out that he's kind of like a heroin mule or something. He's like a drug runner, basically, and that's how he gets his money, and that's why he's constantly on the run. And that he uses those expenses he gets from drug running to fund his sort of depraved, decadent, degenerate lifestyle. There is a little bit more detail in the book that you don't get in the movie. The movie does have more scenes of Kirsty in it. Now, because like I said, the book is really short, and the main character for the most part of the book is Julia up until the last few chapters. So I think they felt the need to expand on Kirsty's role and give her more stuff to do early in the book, because she kind of disappears for a while in the book until she reappears at the end. And now, as people who've seen the movie are wondering, that does mean that the pet store scene, which is one of the creepiest scenes in the movie, is not in the book at all. So there's that. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward adaptation. The next big change comes in the hospital scene after Larry/Rory tells Kirsty to go see what's up with Julia. She sees Julia bringing a man into the house. She goes into the house and finds Frank absorbing his flesh. In the ensuing struggle, she picks up the box to defend herself. She throws it out a window that distracts Frank and gives her the chance to escape. She picks up the box and runs away, and then she just runs for so long and is covered in blood and passes out. She wakes up in the hospital, and, the hospital thinks she's probably on drugs or whatever, and they just want to keep her there for questioning. Anyway, so in the movie, during this time, they hand her the box because they're like, oh, you were holding onto this pretty tightly. The way this scene plays out in the book, as opposed to in the movie, is in the book, the Lemon Chan's configuration doesn't have the gold sort of the gold details that it does. It's basically described as just a purely black square, and Christy is holding onto the box, and now she's just sitting there bored in her hospital bed with nothing to do, so she kind of fiddles around with it a little bit. She can't really make too much progress. She doesn't even really understand what the idea of the box is until she notices that some of Frank's blood is on it, and what she notices is that Frank's blood has seeped into the the little creases on the box, which kind of reveal the paneling. That gives her the hint on how to solve the box, which is one of the things I thought was kind of stupid in the movie. It's one of my few criticisms of the movie, is that this box is supposed to be this really hard to solve puzzle. Christy, who's just this kind of plain Jane type girl, she's able to solve this box that almost effortlessly, that all these other people, it's mentioned that a lot of people can't solve the box. It's just too hard for her, and then she just solves it in 3 seconds. If you even want to say that, this box pretty much solves itself, which is kind of cheating, considering the whole idea is if you solve the box, you get killed. It's kind of unfair. But anyways, she solves the box, and then the Cenobites come out, and they're like, oh, hey, it's kind of, we realize that you didn't mean to do it, but we still need to take somebody with us anyways. And then she gets the idea, oh, hey, maybe, hey, I know Frank escaped, why don't you go get Frank instead of me? And then they strike a deal. In the book, the Cenobites are kind of more honorable, if you want to say that, I guess, in that they're like, okay, well, as long as you don't betray us, we'll probably let you go, but you gotta get Frank to admit it's him. We need to hear a confession. Whereas in the movie, they're more like, hey, yeah, lead us to Frank, and we probably will still want to take you anyways, but we might not. Fingers crossed. So after that, she escapes the hospital, and she goes to tell her dad, basically, and finds out her dad is now Frank, wearing his skin like a puppet. And then it's a pretty similar scenario where they're running, Frank's chasing her, and then Julia grabs Christy, and then Christy, pushes Julia in front of Frank's knife, and she dies that way. So that's, pretty much how it happens in the book, and same in the movie. Then the kind of big difference is at the end. It seems like it's curtains for Kirsty when Frank says something like, oh, it's your Uncle Frank, or something like that, to that effect. And then the Cenobites appear, and they're like, ha, we caught you finally. And then in both cases, they do the whole meat hook thing. And, he gets meat hooked, and he explodes into meat. And they probably say something about flesh, I think. And anyway, so in the book, the Cenobites, right before they're about to meat hook Frank, tell Kirsty, hey, you fulfilled your end of the bargain, now leave. We'll let you go, just get out of here, this is not your business anymore. In the movie, they are kind of more like, hey, come back, we're gonna get you too, Kirsty, you can't escape us. And then she runs out of the room. Then here's the other difference I didn't mention this earlier, but in the scene where Frank meets the Cenobites in the beginning, they mention that there's one of them that hasn't shown up yet and may not show up. They're called the Engineer. In the movie, the Engineer is never mentioned by name, but it does show up as this weird sort of wall-crawling creature demon. It doesn't look like a human or like a... It doesn't look like the other Cenobites. It's just this sort of giant monster that is in this hallway, and then it appears at the end in the house chasing Julia out. In the movie, in the book rather, the Engineer doesn't show up until the very end, and it shows up when Kirsty's fleeing the house. She hears, I think, Julia call out to her, and she looks and she sees what she thinks is Julia wearing her wedding dress, but upon closer inspection, it's like Julia's body, and then her head is in her lap, and Julia says something to her. I can't remember now, even though I just read the book. And then it turns, like, Julia's head starts to glow, and she, like, realizes that it's not actually Julia, it's actually the Engineer. And then she runs out of the house, and as she's escaping, she runs into somebody who's, like, jogging, but then she realizes that's also the Engineer, and then the Engineer hands her Lamon-chan's configuration before disappearing again. Then Kirsty kind of looks into it, hoping that she'll see her dad's soul or something, but then she doesn't see it, and she thinks, oh, maybe if I can get a portal to hell through a puzzle box, maybe there's a portal to heaven through a crossword puzzle. She, like, humors to herself. That's kind of the end of how the book ends. The movie ending is a little bit different. Like I said, she gets chased through the house by this demon called the Engineer demon, and then she escapes with her boyfriend, who is also not even a character in the book. Her boyfriend is barely a character in the movie, but he's kind of there for some reason. The interesting about her boyfriend, too, also, is that in the direct sequel movie, Hellraiser 2 Hellbound, her boyfriend isn't even, like, mentioned, even though it, like, takes place, like, almost, like, immediately afterwards. I don't know. Who knows? But anyway, so in the movie version, her and her boyfriend escape, and then it's shown that they're, like, on, like, a beach or something, and they're trying to burn the box, but then this, like, winged skeleton dragon shows up and grabs the box and flies off, and then the last shot is, like, the Asian market guy selling the box to another man and saying, like, what is your pleasure? Or something like that. Anyways, so those are the big differences between the book and the movie. It's kind of what the changes are pretty much what you'd expect. They made the movie a bit more movie-y. They had to kind of leave out some of the character details and then add some more action sequences. So, you need to have, like, more chase scenes where Kirsty's getting chased by demons and stuff. They had to add that to make the movie a little bit more exciting. The book is really good. If you like the movie, I'd say read the book. If you just want a quick book to read and you like sort of grim, dark, horror, fantasy stuff, I'd recommend reading the book. It's pretty good. It's really short. I read it in just a couple of hours. I mean, like I said, it's only like 168 pages, and this isn't Karl Marx, this isn't Evola. It's pretty straightforward writing. There's, check it out. I've only read a little bit of Clive Barker's other works, and the hallmark of his work seems to just be sort of edginess, which you can tell by his movies. He's got that kind of 80s goth kind of edginess that's not really offensive anymore. It's not really that edgy, but at the time it was kind of... But yeah, so if you like the classics, the horror classics, I'd recommend checking it out. And I would definitely recommend checking out Hellraiser 2 Hellbound, because that is an amazing movie. I think I like it more than the first. I know I definitely like it more than the first movie. It's a lot different than the first movie, but it's still good, and it's a direct sequel. After that, the third movie is okay. It has its enjoyable moments and enjoyable characters, but it's definitely a pale shadow of its former series mates. After that, don't even bother unless you want to have something to enjoy laughing at. In that case, part 4 is kind of funny, just because it's so silly and inept. Other than that, the Hellraiser series, like I said, Hellbound Heart, can't go wrong with that. Can't go wrong with the first two movies. And I'd also say check out the Hellraiser versus Nightbreed comic book. That's pretty good. Maybe I'll talk about Nightbreed sometime. Nightbreed is also a Clive Barker story that involves demons. They're like I said, linked by a comic book series. So who knows? Let's see you next time. Peace out.